You ever feel your heartbeat in your teeth? It's a hollow, thudding ache that shifts your focus inward until every nerve in your jaw aches with anticipation. That's exactly what happened the moment Karina Ellison slid the HR document across the conference table, her fingers barely grazing the paper's edge before she snapped it into place like a gavel striking down a verdict. I watched the heads of operations swivel in unison, their eyes widening as they recognized the stark, typewritten ultimatum puppied beneath the fluorescent glare. Accept the 60% pay cut, or I'll find someone who will. Silence roared in that room, a vacuum sucking the oxygen from my lungs. My pulse drummed in my molars, but somehow I managed not to flinch. Her words came out cold and measured, each syllable a calculated blow delivered in front of the entire staff. Her kingdom. Cold, public, humiliating. Karina's voice never wavered, never dipped into hesitation. She didn't need to. This was her power move, a demonstration of everything she'd built: respect, fear, authority. Yet they didn't know that I was her husband. Not officially. That fact was part of her design. Control behind closed doors, invisibility in public. I'd watched her sculpt our shared world around my absence, turning me into a ghost at our own dinner table, and there she was, doing it again. I kept my face neutral, my posture relaxed, though beneath the surface I was raw with outrage. My mind raced through every memory: late nights drafting our first client proposal, the triumph when we closed that Series A round, the way we used to steal kisses in the stairwell before deadlines swallowed us whole. Back then, we were equals, partners. Now, here I stood as collateral, evidence of her ruthless ascent. When her gaze flicked to me, calm, imperious, I responded with a measured, "I'll need 24 hours to consider." My tone held just enough restraint to mask the tsunami inside. Every eye in the room bore into me, assessing, waiting for a sign of weakness. They didn't understand. None of them knew I'd once been her confidant, her co-conspirator in every late-night brainstorming session. They saw a colleague, maybe an underperforming executive whose time had passed. They didn't see the husband she dismantled piece by piece, the man who had supported her climb to the top while she sharpened her claws. But now, as I watched my words echo against the glass walls, I felt a quiet shift inside, the cracking of something I thought was unbreakable. Something in me broke in that moment, too. Karina's lips twitched, almost a smile. She stood, smoothing the lapels of her tailored blazer, and announced the meeting was adjourned. Around me, chairs scraped back, and a low murmur rippled through the room as colleagues gathered their briefcases and coffee cups. I didn't move. I watched them file past, their conversations hushed, as if they were afraid to disturb the moment's aftermath. Their shocked glances cut sharper than any blade. I allowed myself a slow breath before packing my laptop and notes, every motion deliberate, like a man who wants to show he still controls his own destiny, even if only in that small gesture. When I finally stepped out into the hallway, the corridor lights felt harsh and accusing. I closed my eyes for a split second and pictured Lucas, our 11-year-old, asleep in his room, blissfully unaware that his father was being publicly castrated in the name of corporate strategy. There was anger, yes, but beneath it was a deeper tremor of betrayal, an ache for the life we once shared, for the partnership I believed we had. Yet I knew that path had closed the moment she chose to humiliate me in front of people who would never care if I existed or not. I descended the elevator, pressing the lobby button with an almost violent snap, and as the doors opened, I realized I couldn't go home, not yet. I wasn't ready to face her tonight, to pretend everything was normal over dinner. I ducked into the stairwell instead, my footsteps echoing on concrete, and leaned against the cool wall. My fingers itched for my phone, but I resisted. Instead, I focused on steadying my breath, grounding myself in the moment. I replayed her words, the way she looked at me with that flicker of triumph in her eyes. I'll find someone who will. Someone who would take my place, who would be grateful for scraps. But that wasn't me anymore. The man who sat in that boardroom didn't tremble under her gaze. He didn't cower. He met her challenge with a request for time, a luxury she rarely afforded herself or anyone else. In that request, I felt the spark of something else, hope. Not hope for reconciliation, but hope for escape and reinvention. I pressed my back to the wall, closed my eyes, and made a decision to answer her ultimatum not with defeat, but with defiance. I straightened up, squared my shoulders, and stepped out of the stairwell into the quiet hum of the parking garage. The cool air hit me like a shock, and I inhaled, tasting freedom for the first time in years. I would give her 24 hours. I would consider her cut, her terms, her power, but I would also consider my own options. And when I re-entered that glass fortress tomorrow, I wouldn't be the same man who walked out tonight. Something had shattered alongside my composure, but what emerged was stronger, a conviction that there was a life beyond her empire, and I intended to build it on my own terms. In that dark garage, with the echo of my footsteps fading, I touched my thumb to my teeth, feeling the rapid pulse beneath. Yes, I still felt my heartbeat there, but it no longer held fear. It held determination. I had 24 hours to choose. And I was going to choose me. We were just two names on a startup's payroll back then, Karina and me, young, hungry, and unaware of how ambition can rot the foundation it's built on. Silver Systems didn't have glossy logos or multi-million-dollar contracts at the time. Just a vision and a loft office above a bakery that made the whole place smell like sourdough and dreams. We were a ragtag bunch, chasing cloud infrastructure innovation like it was oxygen, and somehow in the middle of the chaos, we found each other. It started as late-night burrito runs, then turned into stolen kisses by the printer, and before I knew it, we were co-writing code, goals, and a life. Karina was fire, sharp, commanding, impossible to ignore. She saw ladders everywhere and climbed them 2 rungs at a time. I admired that at first. I encouraged it, supported her moves, took notes during pitch rehearsals, edited her presentations, even let her practice telling off underperforming engineers on me just so she'd sound fierce but fair. I wanted her to rise. I never realized she was training herself to rise alone. When she got promoted to VP of HR, I celebrated like it was my own win. She had presence in meetings, command over a room, and I found my niche in strategic partnerships. Quiet work, but critical. I built our client list from nothing: cold calls, trade shows, chasing leads that didn't want to be chased. I landed contracts that floated payroll during tight months, established relationships that the board would later call foundational to our scale. But I wasn't flashy about it. I wasn't on magazine panels or featured in Forbes' Next 100. I didn't need that. Karina did. She loved the spotlight, the applause, the LinkedIn reposts that called her visionary and disruptive. I was content with peace. She craved clout. And somewhere along the way, she stopped seeing us as partners and started seeing me as a prop, a placeholder, a man behind the curtain. We moved into a townhome in Rosegate once bonuses started to roll in. I remember the first night there, standing in the kitchen while Lucas napped upstairs, and she walked in wearing her silver-branded fleece, eyes sparkling from a company-wide presentation she'd just delivered. "We're building something huge," she whispered, arms wrapping around my waist. Together. I believed her. Foolishly. Because even then, the cracks had begun. She didn't ask how my meetings went anymore. She missed dinner twice a week for executive strategy calls and slowly replaced our shared calendar with her own. Our conversations drifted from personal to professional and then stopped altogether. At work, she stopped looking at me like I was her person. She looked at me like an asset, useful, but expendable. I should have spoken up. Should have pulled the ripcord when I started noticing the small humiliations, the time she corrected my report in front of the junior staff instead of waiting till we got home, or when she forgot to loop me in on a major contract negotiation even though the client had been mine. But I didn't. I told myself it was temporary, that the pressure would ease, that she'd remember we were on the same team. That boardroom meeting proved otherwise. After she slid that document across the table, with its ice-cold demand for a 60% pay cut and a threat of replacement, I replayed every compromise I'd ever made for her, every sacrifice that now sat neatly buried under her empire. This wasn't a moment of miscommunication. This was who she had become, and who she expected me to become: silent, compliant, replaceable. I drove home that day on autopilot, gripping the steering wheel tighter than necessary, the taste of humiliation still sour in my mouth. Our neighborhood looked too pristine, too polished for what I was feeling, like reality refused to match the storm inside me. I pulled into the driveway and just sat there for a moment, engine idling, watching the soft glow of our living room lamp filter through the blinds. When I stepped inside, Lucas was on the floor building a Lego version of something that looked like Silver's office. He looked up and smiled. "Mom said you were in a big meeting." He didn't know. He couldn't. And that innocence punched me harder than anything she'd said. Karina was in the kitchen, heating something in the microwave. She didn't turn around. "Hey," she said, casual. like she hadn't tried to publicly amputate my career just a few hours earlier. I wanted to shout, to demand an explanation. But instead, I stared at her back, at the way she moved with such certainty, like her world was untouched by the damage she left in mine. "You ambushed me today," I said finally. She paused. "Barely." Then she turned, arms crossed. "It wasn't personal. It was a strategic decision. You did it in front of them," I said, voice low. "Their staff." "Not family," she replied, coolly. "They don't know we're married. They don't need to." I blinked. "You think that makes it better?" She shrugged. "I made a call. It's not about you." And that's when I knew. It wasn't about me, not anymore. Not for a long time. I had been riding shotgun in a car she was driving straight off a cliff, and I'd been too loyal to jump out. I walked upstairs, past Lucas's drawings taped to the wall, past our wedding photo that still hung crooked on the hallway frame. I stood in our bedroom for a long time, looking at the life we built. The life she broke, one calculated decision at a time. That night, I didn't sleep. I watched the ceiling shift from shadow to sunlight and felt the weight of something final settle into my bones. I wasn't angry anymore. I was awake. By morning, I wasn't the man who used to quietly protect her legacy. I was the man she underestimated. And I was done waiting for her to remember what we built. I was going to build something better. Without her. I couldn't stop replaying the scene. Karina's voice sharp, cold, like a blade across the back of my neck. The way the others looked at me as she did it, some with pity, some with silent relief that they weren't the target. The tap of her pen after the ultimatum. The stillness in the room as I said I needed 24 hours. And now, alone in my car, I sat parked outside our home with the engine off, fingers still gripping the wheel like I was waiting for something to crash. The house was dark except for the small porch light that flickered every few seconds, casting shadows across the front yard like ghosts pacing the grass. I didn't move. I stared at the windshield, my reflection faint in the glass. I didn't know who I saw anymore. Husband, father, employee, target. And now, maybe something else entirely, something I hadn't felt in a long time, unshackled. Humiliation has a strange way of stripping things clean. You stop making excuses. You stop lying to yourself. You see things plain. Eventually, I stepped out and quietly made my way into the house. Lucas was asleep, his door cracked open just enough for the glow of his nightlight to seep through. I paused, peeking inside. He had fallen asleep with a drawing clutched in one hand, crayons scattered across his bed. I stepped in softly, eased the paper from his fingers. It was a family drawing, him in the center, Karina on the right, our dog that died 2 years ago on the left. Me? I wasn't there. Just a smudge where another figure might have gone, erased with a careless pink thumb. Maybe I'd missed too many breakfasts. Too many games. Maybe I'd made myself invisible. Or maybe I'd been made that way. I tucked the sheet on his nightstand and walked to my office downstairs. The walls were still lined with client folders, pitch decks, hand-drawn org charts from when Silvera was nothing more than a desperate group of tech optimists trying to outthink Amazon. I'd built our strategic arm from scratch. Courted clients no one else could get close to. Held on to relationships like they were rope bridges. And now? A 60% pay cut for the man who brought in a third of the company's recurring revenue. Loyalty was a currency I spent far too generously. I opened my laptop. The company org chart still sat open in a pinned tab from earlier that afternoon. My name, now attached to a strange new title, Special Consultant. It felt like a severance in disguise. I stared at it for a full minute before closing the tab. Then I opened a new one and typed 4 words, Kortenix Systems career page. Kortenix. The name had always lingered like a whisper in Silvera's corridors. Our top competitor. Sleeker, louder, better funded. They tried poaching me 3 times before, always dangling better pay, better titles, faster tracks. And I turned them down each time for loyalty, for principle, for Karina. Never again. I bypassed their careers page and pulled up my contacts instead. Jared Ortega. The name brought back a flood of memories. He'd been an intern on my team a decade ago, fresh out of grad school with more ideas than tact. I mentored him, taught him how to pitch without sounding like he was begging, showed him how to read a room. We'd lost touch when he left for Kortenix 5 years back. Now he was VP of Strategic Growth. I stared at his name for a beat longer. My mouse hovered over a message. I clicked. Jared. Long time. Hope you're well. I'd like to discuss something important. Are you available this week for a quick conversation? I hit send. Closed the tab. and stared into the quiet darkness. For minutes later, I heard the ping. I leaned forward and opened it. Marcus. Damn, I hoped this day would come. You free tomorrow morning? Early. I stared at the message. My thumb hovered over the keyboard. For the first time in a long time, I smiled. Something real, not rehearsed or diplomatic. Name the place, I replied. We settled on Rosegate Diner. 6:30 a.m. That was Jared, early, eager, efficient. I leaned back in my chair and exhaled, my fingers tingling with a sensation I hadn't felt in over a year. Possibility. Not in a vague, someday kind of way. But right now, like someone had just cracked open the window in a room where I'd been suffocating. Down the hall, I heard the muffled clatter of Karina moving in the kitchen, probably preparing her overnight oats or one of her nutrient smoothies with all the silent confidence of someone who had never been challenged. I didn't go to her. I didn't say a word. I powered down my laptop and went upstairs, stepping past the photos on the wall, vacations, awards dinners, Lucas's first birthday party. All curated moments, all frozen in time. In our bedroom, Karina was already in bed, a book on her lap. She looked up but said nothing, just returned to her reading like I was a coat on a rack, something she kept around but no longer noticed. I changed in silence, slid into bed without brushing against her, stared at the ceiling, heart still echoing against my ribs. She didn't ask about the meeting. She didn't ask how I felt. She never did. And tomorrow, I would meet with the man she once laughed off as junior talent. I would sit across from someone who remembered what I taught him, not just about business, but about loyalty and grit. And I would listen to what he had to offer, not out of desperation, but with intent. I'd given Silvra everything. I gave her everything. Now, it was time to give something back to myself. Across the bridge, a new chapter was waiting. And this time, I would walk in with both eyes open. The Rosegate Diner hadn't changed since I'd last been there 5 years ago. Same cracked leather booths, same flickering neon sign above the counter, and the same waitress, Gloria, who moved like she had owned the place long before the actual owner ever signed a lease. It was the kind of place people came to disappear into routine. But that morning, before the sun even touched the rooftops, I wasn't here for routine. I was here to end one chapter and begin another. Jared was already seated when I walked in, grinning like a man who'd just found a winning lottery ticket. He stood up to hug me. Marcus, he said, slapping me on the back. I swear, I've pictured this moment more times than I'd admit to HR. I chuckled, easing into the seat across from him. I see Courtnix hasn't taken the charm out of you. Just polished it, he said, then signaled to Gloria without even glancing at the menu. Coffee for both. Black, right? Some things never changed. I leaned back, studied him a little. He'd filled out, his jaw sharper, his suit better tailored, his voice steadier. He looked like a man who finally owned the rooms he used to sneak into. And yet there was still that hint of awe in his eyes when he spoke to me, like I was the guy who pulled him out of his own shadow. Maybe I had. But today, I wasn't his mentor. Today, we were equals. So, I said, folding my hands. Let's talk. Jared didn't waste time. He pulled out a manila folder and slid it across the table. The irony wasn't lost on me. 2 days ago, my wife had done the same thing, with threats tucked behind every sentence. But this folder? It hummed with opportunity. Senior Director of Strategic Growth, he said. 180 base. 30% bonus potential. Full benefits. Signing bonus that'll make you forget you ever got downgraded to consultant. And more importantly, he leaned in, lowering his voice. We'll fast-track you to VP in 6 months, maybe less, if even half your former clients follow you. I blinked. That's generous. No, he replied. That's overdue. I opened the folder. Neatly printed offer letter, compensation package, NDAs, standard onboarding forms. But what caught my eye wasn't what was in the folder, it was what wasn't. No non-compete clause, I said aloud. Jared nodded. We don't need it. You're not just a name on a resume. You're the reason deals close. People trust you. And trust doesn't come with an expiration date. I sipped my coffee, letting the words settle. I meant in my current contract, I clarified. Silvra. Karina had it removed last year. Said it would give me more flexible. He raised an eyebrow. You serious? I pulled out my phone, tapped through a few PDFs, and turned it toward him. Page 11. No non-compete. No client solicitation clause. No IP restrictions. Jared whistled low. She thought you'd never leave. She was wrong. He tapped the table, smirking. You know they'll try to drag you through the mud anyway. I nodded. Let them. I've bled for that company. The files I built, the trust one earned, the clients I signed, they weren't handed to me. They weren't gifted because I married into power. I earned them, and I won't lift a finger to steal a single one. You won't need to, he said. They'll call you. They'll ask where you are. They'll follow because they want to, not because you ask. The waitress brought our food. I hadn't even realized I was hungry until the smell of eggs and toast hit me. Jared took a bite, then pointed at the folder. So? You in? I didn't answer right away. I picked up the pin he'd placed neatly beside the packet. It felt heavy in my hand, not just from the metal, but from what it symbolized. Not revenge, not ego, but self-respect. After being buried in Karina's shadow, after being turned into a convenient pawn in her strategic ambitions, here was a chance to step back into the light. I signed. Jared raised his coffee mug. To new beginnings. To freedom, I said. We ate in silence after that, the kind that only exists between people who understand the gravity of a moment. As we left the diner, the sky had begun to brighten, soft streaks of orange cutting through the dawn. I climbed into my car, folder in hand, and sat there for a long moment. Not because I was unsure, but because I felt weightless. Like the tension I'd been carrying in my chest for the past 2 years had finally lifted. When I got home, the house was quiet. Karina's car was gone. Early meeting, no doubt. She didn't ask where I'd gone, didn't check to see if I came home last night, didn't seem to care that we hadn't spoken since the HR ambush. I went to my office, closed the door, and pulled up the Silver Employee Handbook, the one I'd helped write. It was all still there, pages of policies, clauses, protocols. But none of it applied to me anymore. I was untethered. Still, I scanned through my own employment agreement again, just to be sure. No non-compete. No restrictions on where I worked next. Karina had assumed I'd be loyal until the end. She'd never imagined I'd have the spine to walk away, much less the leverage to land somewhere stronger. She'd unhooked my leash thinking I wouldn't move without her. Her mistake. I printed my resignation letter that night. Straightforward. Professional. No bitterness on the page, but every sentence dripped with clarity. Tomorrow, I would walk into her glass-walled office wearing the same suit I wore when we pitched Silver to its first investor. Black, crisp, poised. And this time, I wouldn't be the one begging for her approval. I'd be the one holding the final word. I wore the suit with intention. Blackwell. Tailored. The one I hadn't touched in years but never had the heart to get rid of. The one I wore when Karina and I pitched Silver to the angel investors who first gave us a shot. Back then, she had held my hand under the conference table, squeezing twice every time she got nervous. No? She wouldn't even meet my eyes across the dinner table. The irony was rich. I adjusted my cufflinks in the mirror, took a long breath, and walked out the door. The drive to Silver was quiet. Not a single song felt right, so I let the silence ride with me. I passed the same coffee shop where Karina and I used to split a bagel on early mornings. She always took the top half with the extra sesame seeds. These days, she barely spoke before leaving for the gym or another strategy call. Somewhere between ambition and titles, we stopped being a team. When I stepped into the building, I nodded at reception, then rode the elevator to the executive floor. My heart didn't race. No tremble in my hands. Just a strange calm, like I was walking into a funeral I'd already grieved. The doors opened and there she was, behind the glass wall of her office, back straight, pen in hand, dissecting some document like it owed her an apology. I knocked once. She looked up, surprised to see me. Marcus, she said flatly. I thought you were taking the day. I'm here to make a decision, I replied, stepping inside and closing the door behind me. She gestured without standing. Go ahead. I placed the resignation letter on her desk. No preamble, no apology, just the truth in 12-point calibri. She didn't reach for it, just stared at it like it might explode. Then she leaned back in her chair, arms crossing slowly. You're making a mistake, she said. No, I replied. I'm making a choice. There was a flicker behind her eyes. Surprise, maybe, or something closer to irritation. She wasn't used to being challenged, especially not by me. You're walking away from 14 years, she said. I nodded. 14 years where I made this company millions. 14 years where I stayed loyal even when it cost me time with my son, cost me my peace. Her tone hardened. You're not going to find another role in this market at your level. Not with your compensation expectations. Not with this economy. I smiled then. Just a little. Actually, I already have. That made her blink. Just for a second. The mask cracked. Where? Kortenix, I said. Calm. Direct. And there it was, the moment she lost control. Her body went rigid. Her fingers curled around the edge of the desk like she was holding onto the ground beneath her. Kortenix, she repeated, as if the name itself was a betrayal. They offered what I'm worth. What I should have been worth here. Her voice dropped. You do realize we'll sue. I reached into my leather folder and dropped the Kortenix offer letter beside my resignation. No non-compete. No IP conflicts. No client solicitation. You forgot to protect the one person you thought would never leave. The silence was heavy. She flipped through the Kortenix contract, her eyes scanning the terms. I watched her lips press into a thin line. The woman who once used to say, "We make a great team," now calculating exactly how she lost a partner, personally and professionally. I removed the non-compete to give you room to grow, she said tightly. No, I replied. You removed it because you thought I'd never use it. Her jaw clenched. I was loyal to a fault, I continued. I passed on offers. Sat through your meetings where I was invisible. Took the back seat so you could shine. I never wanted to be the face. But when you humiliated me in front of your team, our team, you made something very clear. I don't belong here anymore. And I'm done pretending I do. She stood, finally, as if height would help her reclaim authority. This will damage our reputation. No, I said. It will damage yours. For a beat, we stood there in silence. Two people who once built something side by side, now on opposite sides of a war neither of us declared out loud. The room felt colder than I remembered. More clinical. Less hours. I built this company, she said quietly. So did I replied. And now I'm building something else. There was a finality in the way I said it. Her mouth opened slightly, then closed. I could tell she wanted to say more, but there was nothing left that could undo what had already been broken. I turned to leave. Marcus, she called just as I reached the door. I paused, hand on the knob. Why now, she asked. Her voice wasn't demanding anymore. It was something closer to human. I looked back at her. The woman who used to dance barefoot in our living room, who once whispered her dreams against my collarbone, who used to believe in us. Because yesterday, I said, I realized I've spent too long being loyal to someone who stopped being loyal to me. Then I opened the door and stepped out. By the time I reached my office, news had already started to ripple through the floor. Devin from legal gave me a long, unreadable look. Maria from finance stood near the coffee machine, eyes glassy. I gave her a nod. She smiled weakly and mouthed, "Thank you." I packed my things in silence. A few folders. My son's crayon drawing of a rocket ship. A coffee mug that said, "Do the work." I left the framed picture of Karina and me at last year's gala in the drawer. That wasn't a memory I needed anymore. HR pinged me before I could head out. We'll coordinate your exit documents, the email said. Please wait for security to escort you per protocol. Security. After all I'd done, after all I gave. This was how it ended. Like a threat. Like a liability. I waited. Calm. Unbothered. I didn't want a scene. I didn't need one. The security guard was polite, almost apologetic. Just protocol, Mr. Ellison, he muttered. I nodded. Of course. As we walked through the corridor, I could feel eyes on me. Colleagues trying to look busy. Screens flickering with pretend work. No one spoke, but everyone watched. And then I stepped through the glass doors of silver one final time. No announcement. No applause. Just quiet shoes on tile and a gust of wind as the doors shut behind me. But I didn't look back. Not once. The air outside Silver's building was different. Not just cooler, but freer, like the kind of breeze that lets you know you've just walked away from a fire and survived. I stood on the steps for a few seconds longer than I needed to, holding the box of my things in one arm, my resignation confirmation envelope in the other. It was strange how light it all felt. After 14 years of loyalty, I expected the weight of regret, the tug of nostalgia. Instead, I felt nothing but clarity. Devin from legal had sent me a one-line Slack message an hour before. Do you want a quiet exit strategy? I declined without hesitation. I didn't need fanfare, but I wasn't going to slink out the back door like I'd been caught stealing office supplies. I wanted them to see me leave, to feel the ripple of it. Maria from finance had been crying. She didn't say much, just hugged me fiercely and whispered. She didn't have to do it like that. She meant Karina. Everyone did. They'd seen her play her hand, wield her power in that conference room not like a leader, but like a tyrant marking her territory. And now that I was gone, they'd be watching her even more closely, waiting to see who'd be next. The security escort wasn't even necessary, but protocol demanded it. For senior staff, they claimed. What they meant was, for those whose exits hurt the bottom line. The guard walked quietly beside me, eyes fixed ahead. When we reached the elevator, he pressed the button, stepped back. I glanced at him. You draw the short straw? I asked. He gave a half smile. You're not the first executive I've walked out, Mr. Ellison, but you're the first one who left with his head held high. I appreciated that more than I thought I would. When the doors opened to the lobby, I stepped out to a hushed room. Receptionists paused mid-call. Interns pretended to scroll through emails they weren't reading. I walked across the marble floors I used to help mop in the early days when we couldn't afford cleaning staff, back when Karina and I shared a desk and a single dream. Now she had an entire corner office, and I had the one thing she couldn't reclaim: my name, my value, and the trust of every client I'd ever worked with. I exited the building into the afternoon sun, slid the box onto the passenger seat of my car, and sat for a long while with the engine off. No calls, no emails, just stillness. Then, almost like clockwork, my phone lit up. First was Sonia Adair from Teltrix Solutions. Hey Marcus, just heard. Where are you headed? Then Marcus Doyle from Graywell International. Tell me you're staying in the industry. We want to talk. A few minutes later, Elaine Winters. The same client who once said she'd never work with anyone but Silvera. If you're leaving, I'm reconsidering our position. Let's connect soon. I hadn't pitched, hadn't even hinted. And yet here they were, calling, texting, asking where I went. Because it wasn't about the company. It never had been. They were buying me. My judgment. My relationship. The years I spent learning their business inside and out. Karina never understood that. She thought people could be managed like numbers. That loyalty could be drafted into contracts. But real loyalty isn't written down. It's earned. I replied to each one with a simple message: we'll talk Monday. I'll have something to share. Then I opened a fresh notebook. Wrote 3 words at the top of the page: Kortniks. Day 1. That night, I got home before Lucas did. He had soccer practice, and Karina had volunteered to do the pickup, probably to soften the optics, to paint a picture of domestic unity that hadn't existed in months. I sat at the kitchen table, box beside me, and took out a photo from the top. Me and Lucas at a park 2 years ago. He was holding a popsicle, his mouth stained blue, his hand in mine. I'd forgotten about this one. Karina had taken it. I remembered how she smiled at us then, genuinely. I wondered where that woman had gone. The garage door opened. I heard the car pull in, the telltale sound of Lucas kicking off his cleats before he even got to the door. He burst in a moment later, breathless. Dad, did you see my goal? Not yet, I said, standing up. But you can show me. I'm home early. His eyes lit up. You're never home this early. I will be now. He ran off to get his ball, and I turned just as Karina walked in. She looked tired. Not exhausted, just drained in that permanent way success can sometimes carve into a person. Her eyes flicked to the box on the table. So it's done, she said. It is. She nodded. They'll come after you. I didn't take anything that wasn't mine. No clients solicited. No documents. You built your company on rules. I followed everyone. She sighed and leaned against the kitchen counter. I didn't think you'd actually do it. I know. There was a long silence between us, filled only by the sound of Lucas kicking the ball against the living room wall and laughing at the rebound. I never meant to hurt you, she said at last. I met her eyes. You didn't need to mean it. You just needed to stop seeing me. That was the moment it landed for both of us, that the damage wasn't in one public insult or one pay cut. It had started long ago in all the quiet choices, the diminishing, the dismissals, the absence of kindness when power arrived. I hope you find what you're looking for, I said, voice even. She nodded once and stepped past me into the living room. I didn't follow. Later that night, after Lucas was asleep, I emailed Jared. All 4 clients reached out. Not because I asked. Because they saw what you saw. He replied 5 minutes later. Then we begin. And we did. Monday morning hit like a starting pistol. No time for nerves, no time for nostalgia. I sat at my new desk, sleek, minimalist, modern, with a fresh notepad, a full mug of black coffee, and a locked-in determination I hadn't felt in years. I wasn't easing into Kortniks. I was leading. Jared had made it clear the minute I signed. We're not hiring you to blend in. We're building a new lane for you. That lane began now. At 8:03 a.m., my inbox chimed. Subject, checking in. Marcus, just heard the news. If you're open to a conversation, I'd love to catch up. We've got some flexibility coming up in Q3, and I've always valued your insight. Sonia Dare, Teltrix Solutions. Sonia was old school, sharp as a blade, and twice as unforgiving if you crossed her. She never moved lightly. The fact that she was the first to reach out wasn't an accident. It was a signal. By 8:17 a.m., I had 2 more emails waiting, Marcus Doyle from Graywell and Fiona Lacey from Enduratech. None of them asked directly if I'd poached them. They were too savvy for that. Instead, the messages read like invitations. Where are you landing? We may need a new approach. Let me know where you are. Every word coded in plausible deniability, every sentence humming with interest. And I hadn't made a single call. That was the thing Karina never understood. Business relationships aren't built on discounts or gimmicks. They're built on trust. Trust that's earned in quiet ways. Meeting deadlines without being asked, staying late to walk a client through integration issues, remembering the name of a client's daughter when no one else did. Trust lives in the small details. And now, as the news of my departure rippled through the industry, trust was doing the work for me. I didn't rush to reply. I spent the morning reviewing Courtnix's client portfolios, looking for gaps, missed opportunities, areas where we could outperform Silvra. It wasn't hard to find them. Silvra had become bloated, too many middle managers, too many processes that smothered momentum. I knew because I helped build them. But Courtnix was lean, fast, and ready to move. At 11:20 a.m., Jared stepped into my office, a grin already spreading across his face. Let me guess, he said. They're calling. They're circling, I corrected, tapping my inbox. They'll call by Friday. They'll call today, he said, pulling up a chair. Sonia's on a panel with me next week. She asked if we could grab coffee in advance. I've known her for 8 years. She's not a coffee kind of woman. I nodded, but I wasn't surprised. This wasn't arrogance. It was the slow unfolding of inevitable consequences. Silvra thought they owned those accounts. What they owned was access. What I had was loyalty. And that couldn't be bought back. Jared slid a paper onto my desk. List of key accounts we want to target. Most of them are clients you touched at some point, even if indirectly. Take a look. You know them better than we do. I scanned the list. Teltrix, Graywell, Norkin, Xylene, and 3 others I'd helped onboard back in the lean days when Silvra still hosted brainstorming sessions on folding tables. I recognized the names. I remembered the wins. And I remembered how I was never the one invited to the podium when the deals closed. How aggressive are we being? I asked. You tell me, Jared said. We're not stealing. We're simply being open. If they come, we catch. No emails. No pitches. No contact first. Just let the magnet work. And it was already working. At 12:03 p.m., the first call came. My phone buzzed. Elaine Winters. The same Elaine who once told me, to my face, I don't switch vendors. I don't do drama. The woman who once asked Karina to remove me from a Zoom call because she thought executives should know when to exit quietly. I picked up. Elaine, I said. Marcus, she replied, her tone cool but curious. You landed somewhere yet? I have. Courtnix. Yes. There was a pause. Good. I've been waiting for a reason. A reason. That's what I had become, a reason to reevaluate, to reconsider, to realign. We talked for 6 minutes. She asked questions about Courtnix's roadmap, stability, ethics. I answered clearly, honestly, with no attempts to sell her. When we hung up, I didn't press. I didn't follow up. I didn't need to. At 2:12 p.m., Marcus Doyle followed. By 4:47 p.m., I had 6 meetings on the calendar. All requested. None initiated by me. I leaned back in my chair, watching the soft glow of sunset stretch across the Courtnix skyline view, an office without tension, without judgment, without silent warfare tea. When Karina came to pick him up, she paused in the doorway. You're home early, she said. I work somewhere that values balance, I said, not looking up from the drawing Lucas had taped to the fridge. She didn't respond. As they left, Lucas turned back and whispered, Can we hang out again Wednesday? Count on it, I said. I closed the door and stood there for a long moment, the house quiet, the evening light soft and forgiving. I'd spent years thinking that victory was about holding the high ground, staying loyal, waiting to be recognized. But real victory? It was having people remember who you were when you're no longer in the room. And they were remembering now. It was a Thursday night. Late. Lucas had just gone to bed, and I'd finished replying to a last batch of emails, quiet ripples from the growing wave of client shifts. The numbers were speaking for themselves. Kortnick's weekly growth metrics were starting to mirror Silver's losses. Even Jared, usually calm and smooth, was starting to wear a look I hadn't seen before. Hunger. The kind of hunger that came from watching years of waiting finally start to bear fruit. I just set my phone down when it rang, an unknown number, local area code. I stared at the screen for a second before answering. "Marcus Ellison," I said. There was a pause. Then, "Marcus. It's Harland Royce, the CEO of Silver Systems." I stood without realizing it, one hand bracing the edge of the kitchen island. I hadn't heard his voice in months. Even when I was still with the company, Harland was one of those appear-once-a-quarter leaders, only visible when there were cameras or crises. Apparently, this was both. "Evening, Harland," I said evenly. "Didn't expect to hear from you." "I'd like to speak man-to-man," he began, his tone diplomatic, controlled. I could practically hear the legal department sitting behind him, nodding silently. "All right," I replied, walking to the living room window. "I'm listening. This situation with your departure, it's escalating more than we anticipated." "I didn't escalate anything. That's not what I meant." He cleared his throat. "You've built strong relationships over the years, and we recognize that. But the client shifts we've seen recently are the result of trust," I cut in. "Trust you let your head of people publicly destroy." He was quiet for a beat. Then he continued, measured. "We'd like to offer you a revised package. New title, Senior Partner, Equity, Full Reinstatement. We can undo what was done." I almost laughed. Not out of disrespect, but disbelief. The man who once told a boardroom that I was foundational, but not irreplaceable, now wanted to reverse course because he finally understood that foundation didn't mean invisible. It meant essential. "You're too late," I said. "Think about your family," he said softly. I looked down the hallway, where Lucas's nightlight glowed under the doorframe. "I have," I replied. I thought about my son asking why his mother yelled at me in front of the entire staff. I thought about the mornings he saw me leave before sunrise and come back after dark. I thought about the way he stopped drawing me in family portraits because I was always at work. "Marcus, I gave everything to Silvera," I continued. "I built departments from scratch, held clients when your systems were failing, brought in the kinds of contracts that paid for Karina's entire HR restructuring. And when I needed dignity, just dignity, you gave me silence. Until the numbers dropped. We didn't realize. You didn't care," I said, sharper now. "And now that the market's reacting, I'm suddenly valuable again? That's not how it works." There was a long pause on the other end. Then, finally, "Is there anything we can say to make this right?" I looked out the window, watching the streetlights flicker across the pavement. I thought about the peace I'd felt walking into Kortnick's each day. The respect in Jared's voice when he asked for my opinion. The way my calendar finally had room for my son. I thought about the meetings I'd had that week alone, 7 clients already transitioning, for more reviewing proposals. The new team I was mentoring, people who looked at me not as a relic, but as a leader. And I thought about Karina, who hadn't reached out once. Not to apologize. Not to explain. Not even to argue. "You can't make it right," I said, "because you let it go too far. And the worst part is, you probably still don't understand what you let her do to me. You didn't lose a name. You lost the one person who never asked for the spotlight, but held your brand together when everything else cracked." Another pause. But this one had weight. "I see," he finally said. "No, Harland. That's the problem. You never did." I ended the call. I stood there in the quiet, the silence thick around me, the finality of that conversation ringing louder than anything he'd said. I wasn't angry. Not anymore. That part had burned away weeks ago. What I felt now was something cleaner. Stronger. Closure. That night, I walked into Lucas's room. He was half awake, curled in a messy tangle of sheets, his mouth slightly open. I sat on the edge of the bed, brushing a hand through his hair. "You won't have to ask me to be home anymore," I whispered. "I'm already here." The next morning, I opened my email and typed one final message to Jared. Subject, full commitment. Harland called. He offered everything. I turned it down. "Let's move forward." Jared replied 2 minutes later. "Then it's time to grow this thing. Full speed." And we did. 2 months had passed. The skyline outside my Kortnick's office shimmered with late morning sun, the glass panels of neighboring towers casting reflections across my desk. I just wrapped up a call with Graywell International, our third successful transition in 6 weeks, when my assistant knocked gently on the glass. Marcus, there's a visitor. She doesn't have an appointment, but she said you'd want to see her. I didn't need to ask who. I stood, adjusted the cuff of my shirt, and walked out to the reception area. And there she was, Karina. She looked smaller than I remembered. Not physically, but in presence. The steel-hard edges she once wore like armor were duller, and the confident tilt of her chin was now tinged with restraint. Her blazer was crisp, her heels sharp as ever, but there was a quiet unease in the way she held her purse close to her body, like it could shield her from what she'd come to face. She didn't smile. Neither did I. Marcus, she said, her voice measured. Karina, I was hoping we could talk. Privately. I nodded once, turned, and led her to my office. The door clicked shut behind us, sealing in a silence thick with everything we hadn't said in months. She glanced around the space, sleek, warm-toned, tastefully modern. A wall of floor-to-ceiling windows bathed the room in natural light, and behind my desk, the Cortinix logo gleamed against matte black. This is nice, she said, forcing something close to polite. Very you. I sat behind my desk and motioned for her to take the seat across from me. She did, folding her hands over her knee. Her eyes darted to the nameplate on my desk. Marcus Ellison, Vice President, Global Client Partnerships. Her jaw tightened. You've turned half the market against me, she said, skipping the preamble. No, I said calmly. You did that yourself when you made a spectacle out of your husband in front of junior staff. I just left. I was doing my job. You were executing a performance, I said. You didn't just cut my salary. You tried to humiliate me. And you made sure they all saw it. She shifted in her chair. I didn't think it would unravel this way. That's the thing, Karina. You didn't think at all. You thought I'd take it like I always did. Quietly. With grace. You forgot I built Silver's backbone while you chased visibility. I never took credit for your work. No, but you never shared it either. She looked down at her hands for a moment, gathering herself. You were always consistent. Predictable. And you needed that. Until you didn't. Silence again. She looked up at me, the edge in her expression softening just slightly. I came because I wanted to understand, she said. Why you let it all go. Us. The company. Everything. I leaned forward, resting my arms on the desk. I didn't let anything go, Karina. I just stopped holding things that were already breaking me. She blinked. I fought for us, I continued. For the company. For every meeting, every deal, every late night that I covered while you climbed. And you, somewhere along the way, stopped seeing me as a partner. I became convenient. Background. Replaceable. I was under pressure, she said quietly. We all were. But pressure reveals character. And yours came out cold. Her gaze drifted toward the window. Do you love what you're doing now? I didn't hesitate. I do. She nodded once, like she already knew the answer. And Lucas? She asked. He sees me now, I said. I'm home. I coach his team. He puts me in his drawings again. That hit her harder than anything else I'd said. You know what he asked me last week? I added. Why didn't Mom ever clap when you came on stage at Career Day? I didn't even know he noticed. But he did. Her mouth opened slightly, then closed. No defense. No explanation. You're right, she said finally. I stopped seeing you. Somewhere between my ambition and my control, I just assumed you'd never leave. And I told myself that made me strong. It made you blind. She nodded. Slowly. Then stood. Well, you've made your point. I stood too. I didn't ask you here. I know, she said. But I had to see it for myself. What you became when you stopped standing in my shadow. We locked eyes for a long moment. There was no hatred there. No venom. Just a mutual understanding that something had ended, and it wasn't temporary. You were always meant for more, she whispered. I stepped back. You just didn't want me to have it. She took a shaky breath and walked to the door. As her hand touched the knob, she turned once more. Goodbye, Marcus. Goodbye, Karina. She left without another word. The door clicked shut behind her. I sat back down, the quiet settling around me. But this silence didn't ache. It didn't feel like a void. It felt earned. Peaceful. Right. And outside, the city continued to move, deals waiting, clients calling, my future wide open. She had walked into my office thinking I might look back. But I was already facing forward. A full year had passed. 12 months since I walked out of Silver Systems with a box in my hands and my reputation intact. 12 months since Karina's voice echoed through that glass-walled room. delivering a threat wrapped in corporate language. And now, sitting at the head of a wide walnut conference table in Kortnick's downtown headquarters, I realized something. I hadn't once looked back. Not out of stubbornness. Out of peace. Final numbers from Q2, Jared said, sliding a folder across to me. We're up 27% over last year. That includes the Teltrix account, Graywell, Xylene, and now Enduratech. I opened the folder and let the numbers speak for themselves. Every name in that report had once been a silver client. Every deal was one I had either originated, nurtured, or saved when others had fumbled it. But I hadn't poached a single one. I hadn't needed to. Trust is gravity. It pulls the right people toward you once the mask slips from those they thought they could rely on. Maria now ran our partner analytics division. Devin led our compliance team. Both had followed me from Silvera. Not with bitterness, but with resolve. They saw what I had endured. They saw what Karina did. And when the opportunity came to build something different, something ethical and quietly powerful, they didn't hesitate. Kortnick's hadn't just gained clients. It had gained culture. I closed the folder. Let's keep going. No press. No victory laps. Just results. Jared grinned. You ever gonna let yourself enjoy this? I'm enjoying it, I said. I just don't need to scream about it. Later that evening, I left the office while the sun still hung low over the skyline. My car was already idling in the underground lot, another silent courtesy from the assistant I once doubted I needed. I learned something in the last year. Freedom doesn't always come from revenge. Sometimes, it comes from routine. From walking into a place every day where you're respected, not questioned. From leaving early enough to make it home in time for dinner. Lucas was waiting in the kitchen when I walked in. Soccer cleats on the table, a half-eaten granola bar in his hand, and a grin smeared with peanut butter. Coach Ellison, he declared, we've got practice tomorrow. Wouldn't miss it, I said, ruffling his hair. He was taller now, more confident. And for the first time since the divorce papers had been quietly filed and finalized 6 months ago, I saw how much calmer he was. Less anxious. Less confused. The absence of tension in the house had made room for growth, and both of us. He ran off to get his ball from the yard, and I stepped out to the porch, phone in hand. An alert popped up on my screen. Silver stock down 17% following quarterly loss. HR department undergoing restructuring. There was a picture embedded in the article, Harlan looking stiff behind a podium, his tie slightly crooked, and beside him, an empty chair. Karina had stepped down a few months earlier, citing personal growth goals. Translation: she'd been pushed. The industry wasn't stupid. When 4 major clients walked within 90 days of my resignation, it raised eyebrows. When 2 of her own staff followed me to Kortnick's, it raised questions. When the media caught wind of her HR decisions and the mysterious reclassification of her own husband, it became a liability. And me? I didn't comment. I didn't retaliate. I didn't even post a cryptic LinkedIn update. I just kept building. Because real payback isn't noisy. It's dignified. It's being so focused on what you're creating that you don't have time to burn down what you left behind. Dinner that night was simple: grilled chicken, roasted carrots, and a salad Lucas mostly picked around. We laughed about a joke his coach told, and when he went to bed, I sat by the window with a glass of wine and the soft buzz of contentment settling around me. I thought about everything Karina had once meant to me, everything we tried to build together, and how she had weaponized the very thing we created. But I also thought about what came after. The morning sun through Kortnick's floor-to-ceiling windows. The way Maria teared up during our team retreat when she said, "It's nice to work somewhere that feels human again." The late-night pitch meetings with Jared where we built strategies off instinct, not ego. The emails from clients who said, "We trust you to lead this." Karina's voice was gone from my life now. Her silence was louder than any apology would have been. But her absence didn't sting. It was a gift. Because the truth is, I didn't need her to fall for me to rise. I didn't need Silvera to burn to prove I'd been fire all along. I just needed to walk away and remember who I was before I started shrinking to fit her spotlight. I took a final sip of wine and looked out at the stars peeking through the dark. Then I picked up my phone and opened a blank note. Reminder to self. Leadership isn't loud. Dignity doesn't beg. Loyalty, when abused, becomes clarity. Trust will follow the person, not the brand. The best payback is peace. I closed the phone, set it on the table, and turned off the lights. Tomorrow would come, and I was ready. My name is Milo Rivers, and I'm 43 years old. I've worn that age like a badge of modest success, but also like an anchor some days. Camille Rivers, my wife of 16 years, matches me in age, though her accomplishments often feel like they eclipse mine. She's sharp, polished, and adored at her firm, Andrus and Wren Designs. People light up when she walks into a room, like she's the key they've been waiting for to unlock their creativity. I've watched that happen dozens of times. Me? I own Haven Built Cabinetry, a small business that's kept the lights on and even let us travel once in a while, but it's nothing flashy. Nothing that stops conversations. I've always thought of myself as the supporting cast in Camille's life, the guy with the quiet charm and the steady paycheck. And most days, that was enough. So when Camille mentioned the company's exclusive spring gala, this big, black tie event hosted by their president, Lawrence Dayton, I figured it was just another opportunity to do what I've always done, support her. Cheer her on from the sidelines. Let her shine. She said it was going to be held at the Franklin Hall downtown, the kind of place where the marble floors gleamed like they'd never known a footprint. I pictured myself in a suit I'd only worn twice, standing beside Camille in her sleek, tailored gown. She always looked stunning in formal wear, like she'd been born to glide through a crowd with a glass of wine and a polite smile. I'd just be her plus one. The tag-along. The guy with the easy grin and the folded hands. And that was fine. I liked being there for her. I liked seeing her glow. The morning of the gala, I woke up early, nerves buzzing like a low hum under my skin. Camille had already been up, her coffee half-drunk and her phone in her hand, scanning emails like a general surveying the battlefield. I watched her for a minute, admiring the way her hair fell across her cheek, the way her fingers moved fast and sure. She was in her element, even at 6:30 in the morning. She caught me staring and gave me a quick smile, more habit than warmth, and said, "Big night tonight. Don't be late." I nodded, even though I'd never been late to anything that mattered. I spent the day at the shop, finishing a custom walnut cabinet for a repeat client. The sawdust felt familiar, the weight of the wood in my hands a kind of comfort. At noon, I paused to imagine how the evening would go. I'd walk in with Camille, nod at her colleagues, laugh at jokes I didn't quite get, and clap politely when someone made a toast. I'd nurse a single glass of bourbon and keep my mouth shut. That was my job tonight. No hammers, no levels, just smiles and support. I was ready for that. At 6, I went home to change. Camille was already dressed, a deep emerald gown that hugged her curves and shimmered under the bedroom lights. She looked like she belonged on a magazine cover. I told her so, and she laughed, a quick, distracted sound as she turned to check her reflection again. I tried to smooth the lines of my suit, feeling suddenly underdressed even though I'd followed her advice to the letter. She leaned in, gave me a soft kiss on the cheek, and whispered, "Thank you for coming tonight, Milo. It means a lot." I nodded, my throat tight with something I couldn't name. The drive to the gala was quiet. Camille stared out the window, her phone in her lap but untouched. I tried to make small talk, about the cabinet project, about a new client asking for a built-in wine rack, but she only hummed in response, her mind already at the venue. I didn't take it personally. This was her night, and I was just along for the ride. I focused on the road, on the way the city lights blurred in the windshield. We arrived at Franklin Hall, and even from the curb, I could see it was the kind of place where people came to be seen. Spotlights lit the sidewalk, casting gold and white glows over the guests streaming in. Valets in pressed uniforms opened car doors with practiced grace. I stepped out and adjusted my jacket. Camille took my arm, her perfume warm and floral, and together we walked up the steps. She smiled at the doorman like she'd known him for years. He grinned back, tipping his cap, and suddenly I felt like the world was a stage she'd been born to own. Inside, it was exactly what I'd expected, polished marble floors that seemed to stretch forever, a ceiling that looked like a constellation of crystal. Waiters in black vests carried trays of drinks, weaving through clusters of men in sharp suits and women in designer dresses. A string quartet played softly near the bar, their music floating like a warm breeze. Camille's coworkers were already gathering, glasses raised, eyes bright. They spotted her and swooped in, all smiles and cheek kisses. I stood back, hands in my pockets, letting her shine. That's what I was here for, after all. Just a plus one. Just a tag along. But as I watched her laugh and talk, I wondered if she saw me at all. If she'd introduce me, or just let me fade into the background like a ghost. She caught my eye and waved me over, her smile bright but a little forced. I walked to her side, nodding politely as she made the rounds, but no one really looked at me. I was the husband, the cabinet guy, the plus one, the man who'd walk out of here at the end of the night, slip off his jacket, and wait for her to tell me how it all went. And that was fine. Really, it was. I'd built my life around supporting her, and I'd never wanted to take her place. But something in her eyes tonight felt different. Like she'd been waiting for this. Like she'd stepped into a world that didn't have room for me anymore. I tried to ignore it. I tried to focus on the music, the way the lights danced on the glasses, the scent of fresh flowers drifting through the air. I was just a +1, right? Just a +1. And for now, that was enough. Camille had been under pressure for weeks, more than I'd ever seen in the 16 years we'd been together. Every evening, she'd come home with that forced smile, her lips tight and her eyes dark like a storm behind glass. She'd kick off her heels, drop her purse by the door, and give me a mechanical kiss on the cheek, like a ritual we were both too tired to question. Andrus and Wren Designs was a prestigious firm with a reputation for being both cutthroat and innovative. They designed everything from luxury hotels to state-of-the-art workspaces, and Camille was their shining star. She'd been headhunted 2 years ago by the CEO himself, Lawrence Dayton, and she'd risen faster than any of us expected. But this year was different. They'd hired a new VP, Blair St. James. And I'd heard her name come up more often than I'd heard my own. Even in our own home, Blair St. James was a name that carried weight, even in the construction circles I moved in. She was the kind of woman who walked into a room and made every other conversation stop. Word had it she could kill a deal with a single glance, or make a career with one well-placed compliment. Camille idolized her in a way that made me uneasy. She'd talk about Blair the way some people talk about celebrities, her voice filled with admiration and a trace of fear. "She's brilliant, Milo," she'd say as she scrolled through her phone at night, half listening as I talked about a new cabinet design I'd sketched that day. She knows what it takes. I'd nod and pretend to understand, even though I couldn't remember the last time Camille had called me brilliant. As we drove to the venue that evening, the silence in the car felt heavy enough to buckle the doors. I glanced at Camille, hoping to catch her eyes, but she was staring straight ahead, fingers tapping a restless rhythm on her clutch. The streetlights slid across her face like spotlights on a stage, highlighting the tension in her jaw, the shallow rise and fall of her breath. I wanted to ask if she was okay, but I knew better. Camille wasn't the type to talk about feelings before an event like this. She needed to stay composed, to hold that mask of perfection in place for just a few more hours. We pulled into the Franklin Hall valet line, and Camille gave the attendant a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. He opened her door like she was royalty, and she stepped out, adjusting the strap of her emerald dress with a practiced grace. I climbed out on my side and joined her, offering my arm. She hesitated a split second before taking it. That pause felt like a crack in the foundation of the house we'd built together. But maybe I was imagining things. The venue itself was a marvel of architecture, marble floors polished to a mirror's shine, a vaulted ceiling that seemed to disappear into shadows lit by elegant chandeliers. A string quartet played something soft and expensive sounding near the entrance, and the smell of lavender and citrus drifted from hidden arrangements tucked between white linen tablecloths. People in tuxedos and designer gowns milled about, glasses of sparkling wine in hand, their laughter echoing off the stone columns. I tried not to stare at the wealth on display, but it was hard not to feel out of place. Camille's co-workers descended on her the moment we stepped through the door. Glossy smiles, air kisses, perfectly rehearsed greetings that reminded me of scripted lines in a play. They all looked the same, slim, manicured, eyes bright with ambition and something sharper lurking underneath. They said all the right words to her. "You look amazing, Cam." Blair's so impressed with the March project, Dayton can't stop talking about your design concepts. But when their eyes flicked to me, it was like I was invisible. Or worse, like I was a prop she'd brought along to complete the picture of her perfect life. Camille's fingers tightened on my arm just once, like a reminder that I needed to be on my best behavior. I nodded, offering polite smiles and murmured greetings, but I felt like a ghost. They didn't ask me what I did or how I was. They didn't ask anything. I was the +1, the accessory, the man behind the woman. I spotted Blair St. James near the bar, holding court with a small cluster of people who leaned in like sunflowers to her son. She was as striking as Camille had described, tall, with a cascade of silver hair that looked deliberate, her makeup flawless, her posture straight and commanding. She turned her head slightly, catching sight of Camille, and a slow smile spread across her face. It wasn't warm. It wasn't even polite. It was the kind of smile that said, I see you. Now prove you're worth seeing. Camille's breath caught, just for a second. Then she pulled her shoulders back and led me over to the table with her coworkers, like a general leading a parade. The table was long, draped in white linen, and set with gold-rimmed glasses and tiny name cards in elegant script. I scanned the row of cards, expecting to see my name. Milo Rivers, husband of Camille, polite +1. Instead, I froze. There, in a perfect, flowing gold script, was a card that read, Idiot Trash. I stared at it. For a full 5 seconds, my brain refused to compute. Idiot Trash? My fingers curled around the edge of the chair as laughter sparked around me. Soft at first, then louder, like a wave of broken glass. Camille let out a nervous chuckle, her eyes darting toward Blair. And Blair was smiling, lips pressed together in a smirk that said everything. A coworker across the table, a young man with a perfect haircut, snapped a quick photo and held up his phone. That's classic, he said, his voice dripping with delight. My face felt hot. My ears rang. I'd known these people for maybe 20 minutes, but I felt like I'd known them forever. The way they looked at me, like I was a bug under glass, something to be poked and prodded for their amusement. Camille reached for my hand, but I pulled it back. I didn't say a word. Not yet. I just lowered myself into the chair, placed my hands calmly in my lap, and forced a smile. It felt like glass on my tongue. This was supposed to be her world, her night, her people. I was just the +1, right? Just the +1. But in that moment, I realized I was so much more than that. And they just reminded me of exactly who I didn't want to be. It was supposed to be a dinner party, not a public execution. But that's exactly what it felt like when I stared at the name card in front of me. Idiot Trash, written in fancy gold script like it was an inside joke I'd somehow agreed to be part of. I blinked once, then twice, hoping the letters might rearrange themselves into something else, anything else. But they stayed there, crisp and defiant, reflecting the soft glow of the table's centerpiece candles. My stomach twisted. I'd always known Camille's coworkers saw me as a sideshow act, a harmless cabinet maker tagging along for the free food, but I hadn't expected to be branded. Around me, the laughter spread like a virus. Soft giggles first, then sharper, more pointed laughter, the kind that scrapes along your spine and makes your ears burn. I could feel the heat rising in my face, the tightness in my chest that comes when humiliation crawls up your throat and threatens to choke you. Camille was no help. She chuckled nervously, glancing at Blair as if seeking approval or permission. Blair raised her glass in a slow, deliberate gesture, her eyes locked on mine, a smirk playing at the corners of her mouth like a cat toying with a half-dead mouse. One coworker, a guy with slicked back hair and a too-tight vest, snapped a picture on his phone. I could see the glow of the screen, the way he lined up the shot like it was a prize. Oh, man, he said, grinning at his screen. This is going on the group chat for sure. Another woman leaned over, trying not to laugh too loudly, but failing miserably. This is so Blair, she whispered to her friend. She always knows how to make a statement. My fingers dug into the linen napkin on my lap, and for a second, I thought I might tear it in half. But instead, I forced my lips into a smile. It felt like lifting 1,000 pounds with one finger. My eyes moved slowly across the table, catching the expressions of the people who were supposed to be Camille's team. Their eyes danced with delight, anticipation, a hunger for spectacle. I was the entertainment for the night, and they'd paid for front-row seats. Camille shifted beside me, her voice a thin thread of forced calm. It's just a joke, Milo, she said, leaning in, her perfume too strong and suddenly cloying. Don't overreact. Blair has a quirky sense of humor, that's all. But her eyes, God, her eyes told me everything. They darted around, checking the faces at the table, scanning for judgment. She wasn't defending me. She was making sure I didn't ruin her night. Blair's voice cut through the air like a blade. We're creatives, Milo. We go for irony. You know, subverting expectations. Her words dripped with condescension, each syllable a carefully placed dagger. I wanted to stand up, to flip the table and tell them all exactly what I thought of their brand of irony, but something in me refused to give them that satisfaction. I'd spent my whole life building things, shelves, cabinets, intricate pieces that fit together seamlessly. I wasn't about to let a room full of corporate sharks tear me apart with a single joke. I took a breath. One slow, measured breath that steadied the fire in my chest. Then I did the one thing they didn't expect. I pulled out the chair, sat down, folded my hands neatly on the table, and smiled. A real smile, not the fake one I'd been practicing all evening. A smile that said, I see you. I see all of you. And you can't break me. For a moment, the laughter stumbled. Blair's smirk faltered just a hair. Camille's eyes widened in surprise. The guy with the phone lowered it, his grin slipping. The spell was broken, even if just for a second. I held their gaze, refusing to let my expression crack. Inside, I was screaming at the absurdity, the cruelty, the betrayal of the woman I'd promised to love and cherish. But on the outside, I was stone. The waiter came by with the wine, oblivious to the tension that vibrated in the air like a live wire. He poured a glass for me, his hand steady, his face neutral. I took it, raised it slightly, and clinked glasses with Camille. She tried to smile, but it crumbled at the edges. She knew. She knew exactly what this was, a test of loyalty. And I could see in her eyes that she'd failed it before she'd even tried. I took a sip of the wine, letting the taste roll across my tongue. It was bitter, sharp, expensive. I set the glass down carefully, aligning it perfectly with the edge of my name card. So, I said, my voice calm measured. What's on the menu tonight? Other than me, of course. A ripple of laughter moved around the table, but it was different this time, uneasy, uncertain. Blair's eyes narrowed just a touch. She didn't like that I'd spoken. She didn't like that I wasn't playing my part. Camille leaned over, her hand brushing mine like a question mark. Please, Milo, she whispered, her voice trembling. Don't do this. Not here. Not tonight. Her fingers were cold against my skin, and I wanted to pull away, but I didn't. Instead, I turned to her and met her eyes, steady and unflinching. Don't do what, Cam? I asked, my voice low but clear enough for the table to hear. Don't embarrass you? Or don't embarrass them? Her eyes darted away, and I knew the answer. Blair cleared her throat. Let's move on, shall we? She said, her tone crisp, commanding. No need to dwell on a little harmless fun. We're all professionals here. She picked up her fork and began to eat, as if nothing had happened. The rest of the table followed her lead, plates clinking, conversations resuming. But I could feel the tension like a second skin. I sat there, the name card in front of me like a brand. Idiot trash. It was supposed to be funny, but to me it was a declaration, a line in the sand. And I knew right then and there that I was done playing the plus one. I was done letting them treat me like I was less than the man I'd built myself to be. I might have come here to support Camille, to smile and clap and play the part. But this was something else. I sat back, watching them, each face a mask, each laugh a dagger. And in that moment, I decided something important. I wouldn't let them define me. I wouldn't let them take my dignity. They might think I was idiot trash, but they were about to find out exactly what that meant. Camille leaned toward me, her breath a mixture of wine and nerves. Her whisper was urgent, like a parent scolding a child in church. They're just kidding, babe. Don't overreact. Her hand fluttered to my forearm, cold and trembling. Her eyes darted around the table, scanning faces, making sure no one noticed her shame at my discomfort. But I noticed. I saw every flicker of her eyelids, every quiver of her lips, every shift in her posture, as if she were ready to shrink under the table. I stared at her, that mask of composure slipping for the first time since we'd left the house. She didn't say, I'm sorry. She didn't say, that was cruel. Instead, she told me not to make it about me, as if my name on that card hadn't been the opening act for the evening's entertainment. As if I was supposed to laugh along and then vanish, a supporting character in a play that starred everyone but me. Across the table, Blair was swirling her wine like a priest offering communion. Her eyes found mine and held them, as if testing my limits. We're creatives, Milo. We go for irony. Her smile was thin, cutting, the kind that slices deeper because it's framed by perfect lipstick and an audience. It's all in good fun. You can take a joke, right? The rest of the table tittered, heads bobbing, eyes flickering back and forth like they'd been trained to do. A polite, practiced laugh. I forced a smile that felt foreign on my face, a gesture that tasted like vinegar. Of course, I said, my voice calm but colder than the ice melting in my untouched glass. I've always been good at taking a joke. The lie settled in my chest like a stone, because I wasn't laughing. I wasn't even amused. I was hurt, and I was angry. But I'd spent a lifetime learning how to hide that, how to tuck it away behind polite smiles and deferential nods. I'd learned to accept that I was always the plus one, the extra, the guy who showed up to clap politely and then fade into the background. I'd thought that was enough, but tonight, it felt like a prison sentence. I leaned back, letting the candlelight flicker in my glass. Blair raised her eyebrows, waiting for me to explode, to make a scene that would justify their label. I could almost hear the script in her head. Oh, he overreacted. He couldn't handle a joke. The same script Camille was reading from when she told me not to make it about me. But I wasn't about to play the fool for them. Not tonight. So I laughed, low and measured. I get it, I said, letting the words roll slowly, like smoke. It's a branding thing. Andrus and Ren loves its irony. I picked up the name card, turning it between my fingers like a delicate piece of evidence. Very on brand. Blair's smirk deepened, her eyes gleaming with the thrill of control. Exactly, she said, her voice dripping with satisfaction. We're all family here, Milo. You understand. Family. The word made my skin crawl. Families protect each other. They lift each other up. They don't label someone idiot trash and laugh about it over dinner. But I bit my tongue and let the silence stretch. I watched Camille's eyes dart around the table, gauging reactions, gauging me. Her fingers drummed an uneven rhythm on the tablecloth, her bracelet clinking like a tiny warning bell. Of course, I said again, softer this time, as if I were agreeing to something unspoken. My gaze drifted to the silverware, polished to a mirror finish, and then back to Blair. You know, it's funny, I continued, my voice casual but edged with something sharper. I've been supplying your firm with custom cabinetry for 6 years. I've built your conference rooms, your kitchen break rooms, your executive offices. Hell, I even installed that glass feature wall in your lobby last year. But I guess the real brand is, I flicked the name card with my finger. This. A hush fell over the table. Even Blair's smirk wavered for a fraction of a second. I saw it. I felt it. The ripple of unease that always comes when the target stands up, even if just with words. Camille's lips parted, her face pale. She reached for me, but I leaned away. I wasn't about to let her touch me, not after she'd let this happen. Blair recovered quickly, her laugh ringing out, too loud, too rehearsed. Well, she said, raising her glass like a queen in a castle. We appreciate your craftsmanship, Milo. Truly. Let's toast to that. Her eyes met mine, daring me to challenge her. I raised my glass, but I didn't toast. I set it down slowly, deliberately. I looked at Blair, then at Camille, then at each person at that table who had laughed at me. I think, I said, my voice steady, I'm done being the plus one. Camille's face crumbled, her eyes wide. Milo, please, she whispered. But it was too late. I decided. My heart was pounding so hard I thought the whole table could hear it. But I didn't let it show. I stood, smoothing the front of my jacket. Excuse me, I said, my tone formal, cold. I need some air. I turned, ignoring Camille's outstretched hand, ignoring the hush that had fallen. Blair called after me, don't be so sensitive, Milo. It's just a joke. I didn't turn back. I kept walking, each step carrying me away from the table, away from the laughter, away from the lie I'd been living. I was done playing their game, done pretending I was okay with being the man behind the woman who couldn't, or wouldn't, defend him. I reached the hallway, the cool marble walls a welcome contrast to the suffocating heat of that table. I stopped, my breath ragged but controlled. My reflection in the glass door was pale, my eyes darker than I'd ever seen them. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel small. I felt awake. Behind me, I could hear the muffled laughter resuming. The dinner would go on. The wine would flow. But I wouldn't be part of it. Not anymore. I'd spent too long letting them brand me with their labels, letting them treat me like a sideshow. But tonight, I decided to walk away from all of it. The dinner, the disrespect, and the company my business had been quietly supplying for the last 6 years. Maybe they'd learn. Maybe they wouldn't. But that was their problem now. I was done being idiot trash. I was done being their joke. And in that quiet hallway, with the laughter fading behind me, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Pride. Midway through dessert, a delicate construction of chocolate mousse and edible gold leaf that cost more than I earned in a day, I stood up. My chair scraped against the marble floor, the sound sharp enough to slice through the murmur of polite conversation. Camille's hand shot out, her fingers catching my sleeve in a silent plea. Milo, please sit, she whispered, her voice tight, a tremor in her eyes that felt like a threat and a cry for help all at once. I met her gaze, saw the panic in her pupils, and knew she was thinking about the damage I might cause. Damage to her image. to her carefully cultivated place in this kingdom of power suits and Art Deco chandeliers. I gently pulled my sleeve from her grasp, feeling her fingers slip away like water. "I'm just stepping out," I said, my voice calm, controlled, each word a quiet rebellion. I smoothed my jacket as I turned, scanning the room until my eyes landed on the bar-polished mahogany, manned by a single bartender in a crisp white shirt. And there, in conversation with a regional partner, stood Lawrence Dayton himself, the president of Andrus and Wren Designs. His presence radiated authority even in the sea of tailored suits and curated smiles. He wore his success like a custom-made armor, each button gleaming with a kind of effortless confidence. I'd only met him twice before, both times during installations my company had done at their flagship office. He'd been polite, gracious even, praising my craftsmanship and talking about how Havenbuilt's work had saved them money and elevated their brand. But tonight, he was just another face in a crowd until now. I walked straight toward him, my steps even, my heart pounding so hard it echoed in my ears. Each step felt like it carried 1,000 unsaid words, every slight, every patronizing laugh, every dismissive glance I'd absorbed over the years. Camille's voice called faintly behind me, but I didn't look back. This was between me and the people who thought they could brand me idiot trash and still get the best of my work. Lawrence turned as I approached, his eyes lighting up with polite recognition. "Milo Rivers," he said, extending a hand like a man who just remembered an important connection. "Of course, Havenbuilt Cabinetry. Your custom installations saved our Grace and property budget last quarter. That was brilliant work." His words rang with the kind of practice praise that came naturally to men like him, an appreciation for a job well done, nothing more, nothing less. But for the first time, I didn't shrink under it. I took his hand and shook it firmly, feeling the strength in his grip and knowing I wasn't the only one with something to lose. "Thank you," I said, letting my voice stay calm, even. "Your team's always been good to work with, at least, they were until tonight." His smile faltered. "I'm sorry, tonight? What's wrong?" I held up my phone, screen aglow with the photo I'd taken earlier at the table. The name card in its perfect, elegant script. Idiot trash. The letters glared at us, a condemnation in gold foil. Lawrence's eyes darted from the screen to me, confusion flickering across his face. "Ask your VP and her team," I said, my voice low but steady, the words sharper than any blade I'd ever held. "Ask them why they thought it was funny to put this at my place setting. Ask them why they laughed." He stared at the photo, his brow furrowing. I saw the gears turning, the weight of responsibility shifting as he realized this wasn't just a joke gone wrong. This was a potential scandal, an embarrassment that could tarnish the company's reputation. "Mr. Rivers," he began, his voice now edged with concern. I'm sure there's some misunderstanding. Let's sit down, we can talk." I shook my head. "I'm not here to talk it through. I came here tonight to support my wife, to celebrate her achievements. But instead, I was humiliated at her table, by her team, and by extension, your company." His mouth opened, but I didn't give him a chance to respond. I leaned in just slightly, my voice low enough that only he could hear, but firm enough that he'd never forget it. "I'm cutting ties with Andrus and Wren. Effective tonight." His eyes widened, his face paling under the soft glow of the bar lights. "Wait, Milo, let's not be hasty. Your craftsmanship, your team." "My team will be fine," I said, my voice final. "We have other contracts, and now, we'll have more time to focus on clients who respect what we do, and who we are." He blinked, his jaw tightening, his hand dropping to his side. "I'm sorry," he murmured, but the words felt like they were spoken by someone far away. "I didn't know. That's the problem," I said, my tone measured. "You didn't know, and now you do." I stepped back, my heart hammering, but my spine straight. I felt a lightness in my chest, a freedom that came with finally standing up, finally choosing myself over the shadows I'd been living in. As I turned to leave, I saw Blair across the room, her laughter frozen on her lips, her glass halfway to her mouth. Her eyes locked on me, confusion and annoyance warring for control. Camille was beside her, pale and trembling, her eyes wide with disbelief. I didn't stop to talk to either of them. I walked out of that room with my head held high, each step carrying me away from the person they'd tried to define me as, away from the plus one who'd stayed silent for too long. Outside, the night air was crisp and cool, a relief after the stifling warmth of that ballroom. I took a deep breath, the city lights twinkling like distant stars, and felt something in me settle. something that had been rattling loose for years. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I was walking towards something better. I didn't know what it would look like yet, but I knew this. It would have my name on it. No gold foil. No mockery. Just mine. And I was okay with that. Lawrence Dayton blinked, his face a shifting canvas of confusion, disbelief, and something that looked like shock. The kind of look you'd expect from a man whose house had just been broken into, but the thief wasn't there for the silver. No, the thief had come for the truth. "Excuse me," he asked, his voice softer now, almost brittle. A man used to being in charge, caught off guard by someone he'd thought too small to matter. I didn't waver. My hands were steady at my sides, my phone still glowing in my pocket like a smoking gun. I looked him dead in the eye, holding his gaze so he couldn't look away. "Ask your VP and her team," I said, letting every syllable land with the weight of a hammer. "Ask them why my place card read, idiot trash." I felt the words settle in the air, sharp and undeniable, the way the truth always does. His face tensed like he'd just been slapped. I pulled the phone from my pocket, the screen lit with the photo I'd snapped. My name card in gold script, that hateful label mocking me from the linen tablecloth. I didn't have to say a word as I handed it to him. His eyes darted from the photo to me, then to the bustling gala behind us where Blair was holding court, her laughter ringing like a bell over the polished marble. He exhaled, a sound somewhere between disbelief and anger. This is unacceptable," he muttered. But his voice lacked the conviction of a man who'd built his empire on polished smiles and sealed deals. I straightened my back, feeling taller than I'd felt in years. "I respect my wife," I said, the words rolling out of me like a vow I'd been waiting to make. "I came in peace. But now, I leave with pride." I let that sink in, let him feel the finality of it. I wasn't asking for an apology. I wasn't begging for respect. I was taking it. Behind me, the noise from the dining hall continued like a distant party I was no longer part of. Plates clinked, laughter rose and fell, and somewhere, a violin played a piece I couldn't name. But it all felt muted, like I'd stepped through a door into a different world, one where I didn't have to prove my worth to anyone. Dayton's fingers curled around the phone, his thumb brushing the screen as if he could erase the image by smudging it. "Milo," he said, his voice softer now, a note of desperation threading through his tone. "You have to understand, this isn't who we are. We value every vendor, every partner." "Save it," I interrupted, my voice calm but carrying a firmness that surprised even me. "I've been quietly supplying your company for 6 years. My team has worked nights, weekends, and holidays to deliver the best. We've taken pride in every project. And this is what I get in return." I let the silence stretch, let the guilt settle like dust in the air. He opened his mouth, but I didn't give him the chance to spin another polished corporate apology. "I'm not asking for an explanation," I continued. "I'm telling you that your company's name no longer deserves the work I do. I'm cutting ties. Effective tonight." For a second, the mask of the president slipped, and I saw the man underneath, the one who'd built his reputation on deals and handshakes, but maybe hadn't looked too closely at the details. The one who'd let people like Blair thrive because she got results, because she made the company look good, on paper, at least. His jaw tightened, and he nodded once, slow and deliberate. "You're right," he said finally, the words heavy, each one a confession. "You deserve better than this." I nodded, the finality of it washing over me like a cold rain. "Yeah," I said, my voice low but steady. "I do." And then I turned, letting the moment hang like a painting on a wall, and started walking away. Each step felt like a victory, a declaration that I wouldn't be defined by their laughter or their labels. That I was more than a +1, more than the man who showed up to clap politely and then fade into the background. Behind me, I heard Dayton's voice, louder now, sharp as a command. "Blair," he barked. "In my office. Now." His tone was laced with anger and something else, fear, maybe, or the realization that the empire he'd built might have cracks in its foundation. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. The hallway was empty, the carpet muffling my footsteps as I made my way toward the exit. I could feel the eyes on me, curious glances from strangers, staff members pausing mid-step, wondering what story they'd just walked into. But I didn't care. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't playing a part. I was just Milo Rivers, a man who refused to let someone else's label define him. I reached the door and pushed it open, the night air cool and sharp against my face. I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the evening lift off my shoulders like a burden I'd carried for far too long. I glanced back once, just long enough to see the chaos I'd left in my wake, Dayton striding across the floor, his face set in a hard line, Blair staring after him with wide, uncertain eyes, Camille standing by the table, her hands pressed to her mouth like she'd just witnessed something unthinkable. And maybe she had. Maybe, for the first time, she'd seen the man she'd married. Not the plus one, not the cabinet guy, but the man who'd build his own life, brick by brick, and who wouldn't let anyone, especially her, take that from him. I turned away, stepping into the night, my mind already turning toward tomorrow, toward the work waiting for me, the team that believed in me, the clients who respected me, and maybe, just maybe, toward a life that felt more like my own. I didn't know exactly what came next, but for the first time in years, I wasn't afraid of the unknown. Because I'd remembered something important. I was the builder. And no one, no VP, no boss, no dinner table full of fake smiles, could take that away from me. Camille came home hours later. I heard the click of her keys in the door, the familiar rustle of her heels on the tile, the small sigh she always let out when she crossed the threshold of our house, as though home were a costume she could slip off at will. Only tonight, there was no relief in her sigh. It sounded different, strained, almost broken. She stepped into the living room, her eyes scanning the shadows for me. She found me sitting on the sofa, a glass of water in my hand, the TV screen black. I'd left it that way on purpose, a silent room, a place where her excuses would echo without interruption. Her eyes were red, but she tried to hide it by turning away and setting her purse on the entry table. "Why would you embarrass me like that?" she said finally, her voice trembling with anger and something else, fear, maybe, or shame. She turned back to me, arms crossed tightly over her chest, as if she were holding herself together. "You don't understand how that world works." I stared at her, the woman I'd loved, the woman who'd once laughed at my jokes and stayed up with me sketching ideas for the custom cabinetry business we'd built from scratch. But tonight, I saw something different in her eyes, a glimmer of resentment, a thin film of panic. "That world," I repeated, the words like pebbles on my tongue. "The world where your boss thinks it's funny to call your husband idiot trash? The world where you sit there and let them laugh at me like I'm not even a human being? That world." I let the silence hang heavy between us. She flinched, her arms tightening. "It was just a joke," she said, her voice too high, too brittle. "You know, Blair, she's always had that sense of humor. It's her way of..." "Of what?" I cut in, my voice sharper than I'd intended. "Of humiliating people who don't fit her idea of creative? Of reminding everyone at that table that they're better than me?" I set the glass down on the coffee table with a quiet clink, the sound more final than a slammed door. "You laughed, Camille. You laughed with them. And then you told me not to make it about me." She swallowed, her eyes glistening. "I didn't mean to." "But you did," I said, my tone softer now but no less firm. "You chose them. You chose to sit there and let them define me. And that's the part one can't just swallow down like it didn't happen." She sat down across from me, her posture rigid, her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles were white. "You don't understand," she said, her voice a hoarse whisper. "You don't know what it's like in that office. Every day is a test. Blair, she's ruthless. One wrong move, and you're out. You have no idea how hard I've worked to get where I am." I leaned forward, my elbows on my knees, my eyes locked on hers. "Then maybe I don't belong in your world anymore," I said, each word a quiet detonation in the space between us. Her breath caught, and for a moment, I thought she might cry. But she didn't. She blinked hard, pressing her lips together until they were a thin, colorless line. "So that's it?" she asked, her voice flat. "You're just going to walk away?" I took a slow, steady breath. "No, Camille," I said. "You're the one who walked away. Maybe not with your feet, but with your silence, with your laughter, with your refusal to stand up for me." I stood then, the motion slow but deliberate, like a man reclaiming his place in the world. "I'm done pretending that my place is behind you, waiting for you to remember I exist." Her eyes filled, but she didn't move. "Milo," she whispered, but the word felt empty, like a name she'd borrowed from someone else's story. I turned and headed toward the kitchen, needing distance, needing space to breathe. I could feel her eyes on my back, heavy with things unsaid. But I didn't turn around. I didn't give her the comfort of my attention, not this time. The house was too quiet, the clock on the wall ticking like a slow metronome, each second stretching into an eternity. I gripped the edge of the counter, letting the cold granite ground me. I thought about the years we'd spent building a life together, the late nights, the shared dreams, the whispered promises. But I also thought about every time I'd put her needs ahead of mine, every time I'd been the plus one, the silent supporter, the easy laugh in a sea of cold smiles. She'd let them call me idiot trash. And she'd laughed. I turned back to face her, my eyes steady, my heart suddenly calm. I loved you, I said, my voice low. I loved the woman you used to be, the one who celebrated my victories, who held my hand when things got hard. I don't know where she went, Camille. I don't know if she's ever coming back. But I can't stay here waiting for her. Her lips trembled, her eyes brimming with tears. But she didn't speak. And maybe that was her answer. I walked past her then, to the living room, my footsteps quiet but sure. I felt a weight lift from my chest with every step, like I was finally shedding the part of me that had let her world define mine. Outside, the night air was crisp and full of possibility. I paused on the porch, taking in the stars above, the hush of the wind. I wasn't sure what tomorrow would bring, what conversations we'd have, what battles we'd fight, but I knew this. I wouldn't be the man who let a single table of suits and a woman too afraid to defend him decide his worth. Her silence was sharper than any insult. But deep down, I think she knew I was right. And in that knowing, in that quiet acknowledgement, I felt something shift. Something that felt like freedom. Something that felt like me. 2 days later, the morning sun streamed through the kitchen window like a quiet accusation. I stood at the counter, coffee in hand, staring at the same stainless steel sink I'd installed years ago with a sense of pride. That sink had felt like a milestone then, a symbol that we'd made it, that my craft could hold its own in a home like ours. Now, it felt like a relic of a life that didn't quite fit anymore. I took a slow sip, letting the bitterness ground me. The doorbell rang, sharp and insistent. I set the cup down and moved to the front door, half expecting Camille to be waiting with another round of apologies or explanations. But instead, a courier in a navy jacket stood on the porch, a small box in his hands. "Mr. Rivers?" he asked, checking the label before passing it over. "That's me," I replied, taking the package. His eyes darted to the name on the label, Haven-Built Cabinetry, and he gave me a quick nod before retreating to his van. I closed the door slowly, the box heavier in my hands than it should have been. I carried it to the kitchen table, running my thumb along the tape, feeling the tension gather in my chest. Camille wasn't home yet. She'd left early for the office, promising a quick meeting that probably meant another round of damage control. I opened the box carefully, the flaps peeling back to reveal a stack of letters neatly arranged, each one on the same creamy Andrus and Wren letterhead that had once represented opportunity and pride. The first was from Lawrence Dayton himself. I unfolded it, the paper stiff and formal. His words were measured, heavy with corporate regret, but too carefully phrased to be personal. "Dear Mr. Rivers, I am deeply sorry for the incident at the gala. What occurred was not representative of our values or our respect for the craftsmanship you and your company have provided over the years. Please accept my sincere apologies. We have initiated an internal review to ensure such behavior is not repeated." I let the letter drop to the table. I'd expected it, some gesture from the top, designed to smooth ruffled feathers and protect the brand. But as I reached for the next envelope, my hands paused, the weight of the moment settling on my shoulders. This one was handwritten, the ink smudged in places, the handwriting rushed but sincere. "Dear Milo, I'm so sorry. I had no idea Blair would go that far. I always admired the work you did for us, and the way you supported Camille. I recorded Blair that night, bragging about the prank. I couldn't let it stand. I've already sent the recording to Dayton. I hope it helps. Sierra." I read the letter twice, my heart pounding. Sierra, Camille's colleague. I remembered her, quiet, competent, always polite to me at events. She'd been at the table that night, her eyes downcast as Blair's laughter rang in my ears. And now she'd taken a risk to show me that not everyone at that firm had bought into Blair's brand of cruelty. A third letter sat at the bottom of the stack. No signature, just a typed resignation. Blair St. James. The woman who'd turned a dinner table into a coliseum. Her words were cold, formal, a lifeline made of stone. Effective immediately, I resigned my position at Andrus and Wren Designs. I regret any actions that may have caused harm to the company or its partners. No apology. No acknowledgement of what she'd done. Just the finality of a signature at the bottom. I let the letters fall into a neat pile and leaned back in my chair. The kitchen felt too quiet, too bright, like the world had moved on without me. Camille would come home eventually, and she'd find the box. She'd read the letters and understand, maybe for the first time, what her silence had cost. A knock at the door startled me from my thoughts. I stood, moving to the hallway, and opened it to find a delivery man standing there, this time with a stack of folders marked Proposal. He handed them to me, his expression professional but polite. Mr. Rivers? These are from some of the companies that reached out after the gala. I thanked him and brought the stack inside, setting it next to the letters. I thumbed through the folders, each one carrying the logo of a competitor. Design firms, construction companies, boutique architecture studios. Some I'd heard of, others were new. All of them wanted to work with me. They wanted Havenbuilt's name on their projects. A small laugh escaped me, dry, but real. I'd walked away from Andres and Ren thinking I might lose everything. Instead, I'd opened a door to something new, something better. My phone buzzed on the table. I picked it up, reading the latest email from a potential client. Mr. Rivers, we heard about what happened at Andres and Ren. We'd love to discuss a partnership with Havenbuilt. Your craftsmanship and integrity are exactly what we're looking for. Integrity, a word that felt like home in my mouth. The front door opened quietly, and Camille's heels clicked on the wood floor. I turned as she entered the kitchen, her eyes puffy, her hair pulled back too tightly. She saw the box, the letters, the stack of folders, and her face paled. Milo, she started, but I held up a hand, gentle but firm. Read them, I said. Read them all. She sat at the table, picking up each letter with trembling hands, her eyes scanning the words. Her lips parted as she read Sierra's note, her face crumpling at the resignation letter. When she reached the proposals, she looked up at me, tears brimming. I didn't know they'd do this, she whispered. You thought it was a joke, I said, my voice calm. A joke that cost them 3 employees and a reputation. I gestured to the stack of proposals. And it cost you your place there, too. Her eyes widened. They put me on leave, she confessed, her voice shaking. Pending an investigation. I nodded. Because you didn't stand up. Because you let them think that kind of behavior was okay. She wiped at her eyes, her hands trembling. I didn't think it would go that far. You didn't think, I interrupted, not unkindly but firmly. You didn't think about me, about us. You let them decide what mattered. The silence stretched between us like a bridge we weren't sure how to cross. But in that moment, I felt something like forgiveness. Not for her, maybe not yet, but for myself. For letting it get this far. For thinking that being the +1 was all I was meant to be. I stood, gathering the letters and the proposals, stacking them neatly. I have work to do, I said, and a team that believes in me. She nodded, her tears falling freely now. I didn't reach for her. Not yet. Outside, the sun was high, the day full of possibility. My company, my name, was stronger than ever. And as I headed to the workshop, I knew I wasn't the man who'd been branded at that table anymore. I was the man who'd walked away and built something better. The house was quiet again, but this time it wasn't the kind of silence that followed a fight. It was heavier. Still, like the air was holding its breath, waiting for something to shift. Camille sat across from me at the dinner table, where we used to share quick laughs and clink wine glasses over takeout cartons and long days. But tonight, there were no glasses. No food. Just her and me and the weight of what we hadn't said. She pushed her plate aside, it was barely touched, and stared at her hands. She wasn't wearing makeup tonight. No earrings. Just a simple black sweater and jeans. Stripped of the designer polish, she looked younger. Smaller. Like the version of her I remembered from years ago, when we still talked about dreams without worrying if they fit into someone else's plan. She took a deep breath and looked at me. I don't know who I am outside that job, she said, her voice trembling as though she'd never said the words out loud before. I always thought, if I climbed far enough, stayed late enough, impressed the right people, Blair, Lawrence, that everything would finally make sense. That I'd matter. I didn't interrupt. I just listened. For the first time in a long time, she wasn't rehearsing a pitch or reciting some preloaded defense. She was just Camille, lost, hurt, and finally honest. She looked down again. I spent years proving I belonged in that firm. And somewhere along the way, I stopped defending the parts of me that actually did. Her fingers picked at the seam of the tablecloth. Like you. Us. I swallowed hard. There it was. It wasn't bitterness I felt, though I'd be lying if I said it didn't flash through me sometimes. It wasn't even anger anymore. What I felt was more complicated. A grief, almost, for the version of us that used to be strong, playful, imperfect, but real. The us that sat on this same table 6 years ago planning the Havenbuilt expansion, mapping out a life where my craftsmanship and her vision could build something together. We used to have a rhythm. And then that rhythm started to skip. Slowly, at first. Then it fractured completely. You didn't lose yourself, Cam, I said, choosing each word with care. You just stopped defending the parts of you that mattered. Her eyes met mine, full of something raw and vulnerable. I didn't know how to stop it, she whispered. Everything moved so fast. Blair gave me attention. Opportunities. I kept thinking, if I just stayed on her good side, if I just kept performing, maybe she'd make space for me. I didn't realize. I was becoming her. I looked down at the wood grain beneath my hand. I'd carved this table, sanded every corner, sealed every groove. My hands had shaped it over weeks, and now it held this moment like a confession booth. You stood by her while she humiliated me, I said, softly but without apology. That wasn't about business, Cam. That was about basic respect. I know. Her voice cracked. I know. And it's killing me. Tears slid silently down her cheeks. She didn't sob. Camille never cried loudly. Even her breakdowns were quiet, like she was afraid to burden the world with her grief. She wiped at her face with the sleeve of her sweater, but the tears kept coming. I kept telling myself it wasn't a big deal. That you'd brush it off. That you always do, she said, her voice quivering. But when you walked away, when you told Dayton you were cutting ties, I saw it, Milo. I saw who you were. Who I stopped seeing a long time ago. I didn't say anything right away. I wanted to. God, I had so much I could say. But I knew the difference between words that filled silence and words that changed something. So I waited. I forgot, she said, almost to herself, how much strength it takes to stay kind. You've always carried things I never even noticed. You let me take the spotlight while you handled the weight. And I let them laugh at you like you were disposable. I finally spoke. You didn't just let them laugh, Cam. You laughed too. That one hurt her. She winced, her face folding in on itself like a collapsed structure. I was scared, she admitted. I was scared that if I said something, I'd be next. That Blair would turn on me. That I'd lose the life I worked for. You lost it anyway, I said gently. Not to wound her, but because it was true. She nodded, slowly. I know. The room went quiet again, but it wasn't sharp this time. It felt like the silence of something being rebuilt, painfully, slowly. Like we were picking up the same blueprint, unsure of whether we wanted to reconstruct what we had or sketch something entirely different. I looked at her, really looked at her, not the woman from the gala, not the voice on the phone talking deadlines and drafts, but the woman I met all those years ago at that woodworking expo, the one who'd lingered too long at my booth because she liked the detail in a cherry wood drawer. She used to believe in detail, in effort. Somewhere along the way, she'd traded that for speed and power. But maybe, it wasn't too late to remember. I don't know what happens next, I said finally. I'm not making promises. Not yet. She nodded again, wiping at her cheeks. I'm not asking for them. I just wanted you to know I see it now. I see you. It wasn't an apology, not in the formal sense. But it was something more valuable, acknowledgement. And sometimes, the beginning of healing isn't in grand gestures, it's in being seen. Fully. Without excuse. We didn't talk about reconciliation that night. We didn't start mapping out how to put our marriage back together. That would come later, if at all. But what we did talk about was truth. About how we'd gotten here. About how we both let something beautiful become background noise. That night, for the first time in a long time, I slept without bitterness in my chest. The hurt was still there, but the bitterness had left. And in its place, there was room, maybe not for us just yet, but for clarity, for dignity, for peace. I never raised my voice. Not once. I didn't flip the table or throw the wine. I didn't give them the drama they expected. What I did was simple. I stood up, walked away from a table that no longer deserved me, and looked a company president in the eye as I told him, I'm cutting ties. That sentence wasn't just about business. It was about everything. Because I wasn't only walking away from a contract. I was walking away from years of being diminished in whispers and polished jokes. From the quiet neglect, the small sacrifices that had piled up like dust in the corners of a house we no longer cleaned together. I walked away from pretending that being the plus one made me less than whole. That night, I chose something else. I chose self-respect. And it was terrifying. It's funny how fast things change once you start saying no. My inbox, once filled with repeat work orders and mild pleasantries from Andrus and Wren's staff, now overflowed with introductions from competitors, proposals with clean budgets, notes from people who had quietly admired my work from afar. The company that once mocked me as idiot trash had done more for my reputation by disrespecting me publicly than years of silent craftsmanship ever had. It was ironic, but also poetic. Camille, for her part, stayed quiet those first few days. Her leave of absence from work became indefinite. Her name, once said with admiration in industry circles, was now paired with the phrase, under review. We barely spoke beyond what was necessary, but there was no yelling. Just space, time, reflection. One afternoon, I found myself in the workshop, sanding the edge of a walnut slab, letting the vibration of the machine ease something restless in me. The shop had always been where I thought best. The grain of the wood, the scent of sawdust, it was my rhythm, my center. I paused, ran my hand over the polished edge, and felt the smoothness beneath my fingertips. Clean, honest. A piece of work that could stand on its own without explanation. That's who I wanted to be now. That's who I'd forgotten I already was. I kept thinking back to that moment, the second I saw the name card. Idiot Trash. Written in gold cursive like it was a joke wrapped in elegance. But what hit harder than the words was the reaction. The laughter. The silence from the woman who promised to have my back. And the way I sat there, smiling, not because I was okay, but because I already knew I was leaving. Because sometimes walking away is louder than any protest. I didn't plan to become a symbol, but somehow I did. People from all walks started reaching out. A guy from a fabrication firm messaged me, saw what you did, been in your shoes. Respect. A woman who ran a competitor design firm wrote, there's dignity in restraint. Let's talk collaboration. That night at the gala had been their show, but how I walked away, that became mine. It wasn't revenge I wanted. It was clarity. Camille came into the workshop a week later. She didn't knock, just stood in the doorway like she used to before she got too busy for things like this. I didn't look up immediately. I wanted to give her the space to decide what she had come to say. I saw the latest proposal, she said quietly, referring to the one from Maddox Designs, Andrus and Wren's fiercest rival. It's good. They're smart to come to you. I set the sander down and wiped my hands on a rag. They're respectful, I said. She nodded slowly, stepping further in. I used to be. The silence between us held, not sharp, not bitter, just honest. I know it doesn't fix anything, she said, but I wanted to say thank you for not making a scene, for showing grace when I didn't deserve it. I turned to her, really looking now. It wasn't grace, Cam, I said. It was choosing myself. Something I should have done a long time ago. She nodded again, tears welling but not falling. I see that now. And I think she did. Not just the damage, but the quiet strength it took to stand without applause, to leave without slamming the door. Not because I wanted to hurt her, but because I'd finally remembered who I was before the laughter, before the compromise. The man who builds, who crafts, who holds his name with quiet pride. That night at the gala, I walked away from a table full of people who thought they could define me. But what they never understood was, I wasn't walking away from something. I was walking towards something else. Toward dignity. Toward peace. Toward the version of myself who didn't need a spotlight to matter. And maybe, just maybe, toward a future that belonged entirely to me. I never raised my voice. I didn't break anything. That night, when I stood from that table and calmly walked away, it wasn't anger that drove me, it was clarity. For the first time in years, I didn't feel small or overlooked or second best. I felt grounded. And when I told Lawrence Dayton, I'm cutting ties, I wasn't just speaking to a company. I was speaking to everything that had made me feel like I didn't belong. Camille, the laughter, the name card, the hollow apologies, they were all noise. White noise I had trained myself to ignore for the sake of keeping peace, for the illusion of partnership, for love that had stopped looking like love. But that night, I made a choice I should have made years ago. I chose me. It wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about making a scene or proving anything to them. It was about self-respect. A quiet, firm refusal to let anyone else narrate my worth. I had spent years standing just outside the circle, building things with my hands, while others build illusions with words. They mocked the simplicity of what I did because they didn't understand it. But they stood in buildings I designed, sat at tables I crafted, and toasted in rooms I built. They couldn't see the value in the hands that built their foundation, until those hands let go. And Camille, my wife, my partner, she saw it too late. Maybe that's the cruelest part. She saw who I was only when I walked away. But even then, I didn't scream or slam doors. I didn't write long speeches or post anything online. I just left, with my dignity intact. And it turns out that silence echoed louder than anything I could have shouted. Now, when I look in the mirror, I don't see the man who was laughed at or labeled. I see the man who walked away. The man who rebuilt himself, not in spite of the insult, but because of it. And as I lay my tools down at the end of the day, sawdust in my palms and purpose in my chest, I know exactly what that moment was. It was the moment I chose peace over pride. It was the moment I remembered who I was. And that, I've learned, is what real love, real dignity, actually looks like. Even if it means starting again.